How's it going, guys? Welcome to the Talk4 Podcast. So excited to have you here today and show you this fantastic episode. Just want to say quickly that episodes like this one and all the ones before and the ones in future are made possible by people who subscribe. Hopefully, just like you. I'm going to ask you today if you can leave a subscribe, leave a follow, leave a rating, leave a like or a comment, and just support the show in the little ways that you can, like that. It makes a huge difference on my end. And quickly, just want to plug as well. I've taken 30 of the best episodes of this podcast and turned them into a fantastic book that goes into 150 secrets to greatness. Each one of those 30 episodes gets crunched down into 5 of the best key takeaways from the whole talk and turns them into a fantastic book. Highly recommend you check it out. Please support the show by grabbing a copy, either a paperback or an ebook. And I can't wait to show you guys this one today. So guys, without further ado, let's get over to the episode. How's it going, guys? Welcome to episode 172 of Talk4, the quickfire podcast where we ask 4 great questions to unique and interesting people. Behind the mic today is your host, Louis Skupien. That's me. And let me introduce our incredibly special guest for today, Mike Durant. He's going to be answering some questions today. So, Mike, how are you doing today? Welcome to the show. Super honored to have you here. I'm really excited about this conversation. It's going to be a great one.
I'm doing well. Happy to be here. I appreciate it.
It's going to be really good. And like I was just saying, a story like yours, it fits right amongst the top tier of what we've had on this podcast before. Chris from 13 Hours, Charlie Plum, Vietnam War veteran, prisoner of war. It's just, honestly, this is such an on-topic conversation for this show. I've been so excited to have this. So let me kind of give the audience a bit of a rundown of what I have on you here. And then we're going to get into a bit of a questions back and forth after that then. So retired US Army Chief Warrant Officer and veteran Blackhawk pilot, Mike is known for surviving the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, during which he was shot down and captured by Somali forces in a harrowing 11-day ordeal. Beyond his combat experience, Mike has become a respected author, speaker, and leadership expert, sharing lessons from the battlefield on resilience, decision-making, and courage under pressure. His story is one of extraordinary skill, determination, and the human spirit in the face of extreme adversity. Mike, anything I'm missing there, or does that sound about right?
If I hadn't heard that version before, did you write that yourself?
I certainly did. That was my one. Fantastic. So I was wondering if you could give us a bit of an intro into you as well then. So obviously that's what I've got on you, but if you give us kind of like a bit of in a nutshell description of what you get up to every day nowadays and who you are and what you're all about, that would be a great place to start. Then we're going to dig into those 4 big questions.
So in terms of today, I'm retired twice, actually. I retired from the military. I had a 22-year career there. And then I got out and worked in industry for a while. And then I had my own company for 15 years, which I sold, and I've retired from that also. And currently serving on a variety of nonprofit boards and staying as active as I can. I think the key to longevity once you reach this point in life is staying active, both, exercising your mind and your body. And I ski, I play hockey, I climb mountains, I run. I just ran the New York City Marathon. So, I'm doing all the things that I can to try to extend this, what I feel is a great life that I've had.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's dig into a bit of the origin there, a bit of the backstory, and then we're going to kind of dig into the story of everything that happened then. So your journey from a young Army aviator to flying an elite special operations like the Task Force Ranger is remarkable. What initially drew you to aviation and military service, and how did your early experiences shape the leader and warrior you became? And also, let's talk a bit about aviation passion as well. I mean, the Blackhawk, one of those just legendary, incredible machines that aviation respects and loves, and I certainly do as well. So talk to us about that, how that came about, and just everything from the early days to where you got in.
Sure. So, I grew up in a small town. There weren't a lot of great career opportunities that I had been exposed to. And when I was a teenager, I had really a turning point in my life. I got to go on a flight in a helicopter with a friend of our family. He was actually an Army helicopter pilot. He had his own business and he owned some aircraft. And he took me up And I was just absolutely blown away by it. I couldn't believe that this is potentially something I could do as a profession. And he explained how, yeah, you could join the military and they'll train you how to do this. And, you know, it's certainly an option you should consider. And so from that point forward, I really made it my goal to try to make that happen. And, like everything else in life, there's delays and there's sort of obstacles in your way and things happen. But I got to flight school at a fairly young age. I think I started when I was 20, maybe just turned 21. And I was pretty good at it. I mean, you never know what you're going to be good at. I'm not an extraordinarily gifted athlete. I'm not, I did okay in school, but I wasn't, a genius or anything like that. But when it came to flying and this sort of intangible thing that we call situational awareness, where you know what's happening, not just in the cockpit, but in your entire surroundings, which is really critical for a helicopter pilot in particular. It just came naturally to me. So I did really well in school, flight school. I got the only Blackhawk transition in the class, and the Blackhawks were brand new. And as you just said, it is truly an amazing platform. And when you think about the fact that the very first models were either 1977 or 1978 models, I mean, it's been around for a long time. And there's been improvements made to it, but essentially it's the same aircraft. And it's used by all the services in the U.S. It's globally. I think the last count I knew there were 27 countries, probably much more than that now, flying the aircraft, because everybody recognizes it. It's just, if you can afford it, it's not cheap, but if you can afford it, it is an amazingly capable helicopter.
Yeah.
So I flew it for a few years. I flown medevac missions. I flew in the 101st Aviation Battalion in the 101st Airborne Division. And I had heard about this special operations unit that had been formed. And it really, I was quite intrigued by it because it was secret. It was, they had specialized equipment. They had very special customers. And I thought, well, maybe that's the next step for me. And I pursued that path and ultimately was accepted and started in that special operations unit in 1988. And I stayed there for 13 years. That's the other amazing thing about it is, unlike the rest of our military, certain ranks and certain skill sets can stay as long as the individual wants to stay. So I was able to stay there for the entire rest of my career, and I finally retired at 22 years. And as you mentioned, we were quite busy. I mean, the unit is involved in pretty much every high-profile mission involving helicopters that the U.S. gets involved in. I mean, the latest one, obviously, in Venezuela, but pretty much everything, since it was formed. The first combat mission was Grenada, and then everything since it has involved 160th aircraft. And I'd like to think, we have just truly the best aviators, the best platforms, the best support, best leadership. I mean, it's just an amazing unit, and I was really, really very, very proud, and still am, that I served there.
Absolutely. I mean, that certainly seems like it's true. I mean, you look at the platforms that are still out there nowadays of, they have aged a bit, but they are still very relevant. Like, the B-52, the F-16, the Blackhawk. And in fact, I think I just literally read on the news today that the UK here is thinking about buying some Blackhawks as well. So, I figured it'd be a good time to ask that question then. What makes the Blackhawk so special? I mean, you've had a lot of time in it. Why do you think it stood the test of time so well? Why is it so respected, known, and truly just effective at what it does in such a multi-role platform?
Well, first and foremost, it had a really tough act to follow. For those who may not be experts in military aviation, the Blackhawk primarily replaced the Huey. And the Huey was just, again, another amazing helicopter for its time, and is still flying today. It really, really, really dominated the rotary wing industry, certainly from a military perspective. And I think what makes the Blackhawk as good as it is all the lessons learned from our first big helicopter war in Vietnam. We know why we lost aircraft. We know what limited the capability of those aircraft in combat. And we captured all those lessons and we structured a procurement to go out and buy an aircraft that would meet all of those requirements that we had an opportunity to define, in combat. 2 engines, crash-worthy fuel systems, redundant electrical, redundant hydraulics, redundant flight controls, more power, more speed. I mean, again, truly the next evolution of what was already a great basic platform in the Huey has now become an even better one. And then over time, because the Blackhawks have been around now for almost 50 years, the engine has been improved. The avionics is probably where the biggest difference has come, because when the aircraft was first fielded, they had, what we would call steam gauges, which is basically needles and dials and things that, traditional aircraft would have had. And now, just like the cars most people drive, everything's integrated and it's digital and it's touchscreen. And so that's where the biggest changes have probably occurred in terms of the aircraft itself. And then there's, mission equipment, survivability equipment, weapons, communications, all those things just continue to get better as, requirements evolve, because they do. I mean, today, what we face today is not what we faced in 1980. So we have to keep up with all that.
Absolutely. I've been waiting for a good an episode of a Blackhawk pilot, because a question I've always wanted to ask as well was a couple of years ago now, I had a really unique opportunity to fly the Red Bull helicopter with Aaron Fitzgerald, and we did all the aerobatic maneuvers and the barrel rolls and the front flips and the back flips in the Red Bull helicopter, the BA 105, and it was a whole lot of fun. And I remember speaking to Aaron, and we were talking about these maneuvers and if they were possible in other helicopters. And I think he actually had mentioned at the time that he had done something similar in a Blackhawk. So in terms of, it's a big helicopter, but in terms of agility, how nimble it is as well, and what you can actually do in that platform, especially back when you were flying it too, when I imagine also, kind of like ground fire would have been, more of a threat, and, quick maneuvering would have been important, whereas now it's kind of, more long range, laser guided, things like this. Can you talk to me a bit about how agile that platform is as well?
Yeah, so it's not designed to do aerobatics, although some argue that it would be capable if you flew it correctly. The problem with helicopters is when you put different loads on the rotor system, and I don't want to get too far down in the weeds here, but the rotor system has to be designed to take those loads to do things like loops and rolls. But in terms of maneuverability, it is highly maneuverable. I mean, it'll bank. When I first started flying them, our limitation was a 90-degree bank. So that means the aircraft is basically, the rotor system is now vertical instead of horizontal. And I mean, it flew no problem in that situation. I remember we have this thing called an attitude indicator, which is basically a ball in the center of the instrument panel that it shows you what your wings are doing relative to the earth. And there's a dot on the back of the attitude indicator if you actually get to the point where you've got the thing spun completely around. And I had probably exceeded some limitations by doing that, but I do recall seeing the back of the attitude indicator. So, in terms of its capability, it will do anything you need it to do in its combat role. Because, you could argue that there's some potential for air-to-air combat between helicopters. It has happened. It's very rare. But in terms of, evading ground fire, evading enemy threats, it's as maneuverable as anything out there.
Yeah, I can imagine. You can see that as well. It's an incredible machine. It's also seen tough days of battle as well, and you're the man to talk on that. You were there. You lived some of those tough days. So if we kind of talk about that story, then if you're comfortable with doing so, I think it would be really interesting to get it from your perspective, because it's one thing seeing the movie Black Hawk Down or just hearing the story, but hearing it from you as well is a really, really important part of this too, I think. So your role in the Battle of Mogadishu and the events chronicled obviously in Black Hawk Down are some of the most intense combat moments in modern US history. Could you please walk us through what it was like that day? So from the moment that your aircraft was hit to the challenges on the ground, then we'll talk more about obviously the captivity and stuff afterwards, but just sort of that day? Did you have a feeling? Did you know? What was that like? Just walk us through all of it. Tell us the story.
Sure. I guess let me start by saying, I've been asked many times, how accurate is Blackhawk down? And I always tell people it's accurate enough in terms of getting a general sense of what happened that day and the amount of fire and the threat and the city and everything else. It does a pretty good representation of reality. There's some minor things. Now, I'm speaking from an air perspective. I think the ground guys might have a totally different opinion, but that's my air perspective. So it was the seventh mission. It was a Sunday afternoon. We were very successful up to this point. We captured almost 30 people that were on a list of 50 that the United Nations wanted apprehended. So we're out there prosecuting missions, capturing people, flying them back, turning them over to the UN. And we've done well, 3-day missions, 3-night missions. Now this one ends up being a day mission, which is probably the single biggest factor in terms of how this all played out, because we can't use our night advantage with all the equipment that we have if we're out there flying in the daytime. But the decision was made to go, and we launched. Initially, pretty much going like all the other missions. And it's a lot of helicopters. If you add them all up, there's close to 20 helicopters assaulting this target in a variety of combinations. Assault platforms, attack platforms, search and rescue platform, command and control. All. We've rehearsed this thing 100 times by this point, so we're very familiar with what everybody's doing and what everybody's roles and responsibilities are. And in terms of airspace deconfliction, which is a major concern when we have that many aircraft operating in very, very condensed airspace, because we had rehearsed it so much, I don't think we ever even had a close call. So, obviously proves that all that planning and rehearsal pays off. We did the infiltration. It went pretty smoothly. It was very, very dusty. There is actual mission video that's available out there on the internet. It's pretty easy to find these days. It didn't really emerge for the first 10 or 15 years, but it's out there now, and you can Google that and find it. And you can see I'm actually the lead aircraft because I was the flight lead for my element, and you can see us coming in a box formation, and we are our role, our flight. We're trying to seal the target. So we're putting rangers on each corner so that whoever's in there that we're after, that the Delta assault force is trying to capture, is not able to escape and then to hold off any reinforcements that come in. And the infiltration went well. And essentially for me, at this point, the mission per the plan is over because we were going to exfil the ground force by ground vehicle. And that's why if you watch the movie, there's so many ground vehicles involved because they were the primary method to extract the force. Again, because we knew there was a high threat here and helicopters are very vulnerable in that sort of environment. When you're up close, basically surrounded by the enemy, we felt the most tactically sound approach to this would be to exfil the force by ground. Well, unfortunately, the ground vehicles were getting beat up pretty bad too. And in the process, one of our helicopters providing fire support over the target was shot down. That's Super 6-1. That's the first aircraft shot down. And this is the one that really complicates the situation because the crew is trapped. The pilots are trapped in the wreckage. They're both killed by impact. And you've got wounded assaulters on board the aircraft that have to be extracted. They're isolated. They're not in the main target area. And the commander really didn't have the assets to handle one of these situations and now has multiple situations because he's got the assault force on the target, he's got the ground convoy trying to get to the target, and now he's got a crashed aircraft isolated from the target. So we put the search and rescue team in. That aircraft gets hit by a rocket propelled grenade. Fortunately, it doesn't damage the aircraft too significantly, and it speaks to the durability of the Blackhawk. The RPG hit the side, blew a big hole in it, huge damage to the rotor blades, but it kept flying. They got the search and rescue team on the ground, and they made it back to the airfield. And then the commander called me and asked me to come in and replace that first aircraft. So what we were doing was orbiting the target, providing fire support from the air, because our weapons are much more capable than anything you could carry in, on your back or by hand. We've got miniguns on these aircraft, and they will do a heck of a job keeping the bad guys at bay. But, in an urban environment, it's very difficult to see where everyone is because everyone's taking cover. So as you're flying around at a fairly high speed, because you're trying to keep your speed up to make yourself hard to hit, sorting out where all the friendlies are and where all the enemy is, it's very, very difficult. And in the process of trying to do that, we were hit by an RPG also. And in our case, it eventually totally blew the tail off the aircraft. Now, not the whole tail boom, but the tail rotor, that little rotor that's on the end of the tail, on the tail boom. And that's a bad, saying it's bad is an understatement. Losing tail rotor at low altitude, low airspeed in a helicopter like a Blackhawk is, it's about as bad as it gets. And the aircraft was spinning out of control. I was flying, and I remember, when you've flown something for years, it's like if you own the same car for a decade, it sort of becomes second nature to do things in it. And I remember looking down at my feet, incredulous, because I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing to stop the nose from turning, but it won't stop. And that's when I realized, okay, we've lost the tail rotor. And what's creating that spin is the torque in the rotor system. So we're actually, if you reach equilibrium, arguably the fuselage of the aircraft would be spinning almost as fast as the rotor system was. You'll never get to that point, but that's where the force is coming from. It's from the torque of the engines and the main rotor system, causing the fuselage to want to spin the other direction. And the only thing you can do in that flight profile is shut the engines off, because the engines create torque. You shut the engines off, the torque goes away, and you stop spinning. But with no engines, no tail, from 100 feet, it's a pretty quick ride to the ground. So we crashed very, very hard. Broke my femur, broke my back, unconscious. Crew chiefs are hurt, probably worse than I was, because they don't have as good of seats as we do, at least not at the time. And my co-pilot, Ray Frank, was injured pretty significantly as well. But my goal was to get it upright on the ground. And, how I did it, I can't say. But all I can tell you is we crashed on the wheels, and that's the only reason that any of us survived the impact. Jeez. And it goes back to what we talked about, crash attenuation built into the landing gear, stroking seats, fuel lines that break away and don't leak. I mean, just all these features that were carried forward from what we learned in Vietnam that make the aircraft such a great machine today. So I regained consciousness, and it's as though someone had shut the aircraft down, because all the fuel lines broke off, so the engines stopped running, and everything stopped turning. And by the time I regained consciousness, we're just sitting there in this badly damaged, what used to be a Blackhawk, in the middle of this shanty town, realizing that we were in a pretty bad predicament.
Yeah, that's a terrible predicament. So what happens then? I mean, are there other gray spots in what you remember from that? Do you remember that it was just your training that all kicked in straight away? I mean, were you even capable of setting up, basic survival priorities and stuff? I mean, what happened then? What were the initial steps? How do you react in a situation like that? And you know what? If we can start to maybe tie a few lessons into this too, just when crisis happens, or the worst possible things happen, in a situation like that, whether that's business or life or whatever, is there any way you can slide in a few pointers too about how to stay collected under pressure and just prioritize things?
Yeah, well, I think being prepared is first and foremost, in as much as you can. Sometimes things are going to happen that you don't anticipate, and you haven't been able to prepare, at least not in depth for. But the more preparation you do, for example, the training we do in aviation is geared toward helping you deal with emergency situations that you may never encounter. But when they do, because you've rehearsed it over and over, whether it was in the actual aircraft or in a simulator or just table talk, you're as prepared as you can be. And, there are a lot of malfunctions that if you didn't train when they occurred, you'd have no clue what was going on or know how to respond. So I would say first and foremost, it's preparation. And as much as you can, think through, what might happen and be prepared to deal with it when and if it does. I would say once you're in the thick of it, to your latter question, it's simply, for me, I'm always trying to find a solution. It's not I don't feel overwhelmed by challenges. I'm always just, okay, this is the challenge. Yeah, I didn't expect it to happen exactly quite this way. Here's what we need to do. Always just trying to find a way to move forward in a positive direction. And if you can make small steps in a positive direction, regardless of how bad the situation is, it gives you that sense that, maybe you can overcome this and gain some momentum and then, really take on the larger scale issue. So when I first regained consciousness, the first thing I'm thinking about is fight. I felt like everyone knew what had happened because we're in the middle of this flight of aircraft. So it's not like I'm 100 miles away and I need to communicate to somebody, hey, we've gone down. I mean, there were multiple witnesses to the aircraft going down. So I know in my mind that everybody knows we crashed, everybody knows where we are. I don't need to worry about communication. But if that had not been the case, the first thing would have been, you got to communicate. You got to let somebody know what's happening. So for me, it was fight. And I had my MP5, which is a 9mm submachine gun, sitting on the floor in the cockpit because in my mind, if I needed it, I didn't want it to be, strapped down in the back or in some cargo compartment that I can't get to. And in this case, obviously, that was the right choice because I couldn't move. The crew chiefs were incapacitated, and it was right there. So I was able to pick it up, get the debris out of the way, try to, assess the situation, and decided that I was going to fight it out from the cockpit for as long as I could. Now, the movie, here's where it deviates from the truth. It shows me firing a bunch of rounds from the cockpit. I never fired a round from the cockpit. I never saw a Somali approaching while I was still sitting in the cockpit. So a little bit of Hollywood there. I guess if they're gonna deviate, if they make you look better than you looked in the real world, that's a good, for you, which they did in this case. The next thing that of significance is my co-pilot Ray. He is not hurt as bad as I am for some reason. I'm not sure why. He was older than me. He had been in a helicopter crash, very similar to this actually, previously, not shot down, but a mechanical malfunction. But he was able to get out. I think it's because my femur was broken, which is obviously your thigh bone. His lower leg was broken, which is a little bit easier to deal with than a femur fracture. And he was able to make his way out. And the last time I saw him, he was, from my perspective, looked like he was going to go try to take cover behind a tree and do what he could do to try to defend our site. And then on the right side, because I'm in the right seat, these two Delta Force snipers show up. And to me, game over. I mean, these guys are already here. It's Randy Sugard and Gary Gordon. I'm not sure how they got there, but I knew them. And it's a tremendous sense of relief that this is just amazing that, this is already moving in such a positive direction. But what I didn't know is that there were only two of them. And it would take, I think, 8 hours for the next American to get to our crash site. So Randy and Gary get me out of the bird. They give me my MP5, and they start to secure the perimeter. And we are now under attack. The Somalis had figured out that we were there. We were lightly defended and much easier target than the main force, which had about 100 guys. We've got at best 4 people for them to overrun. And the firefight lasted maybe 10 minutes. A lot of shooting. Randy and Gary were tremendous marksmen. Obviously, they were snipers and an elite special operations unit, so they could shoot like nobody's business. And in the aftermath, the Somalis say there were near almost 30 Somalis killed by gunfire, crash by two, to give you some sense of how much shooting was going on. And I ran out of ammunition. Randy came around asking for more weapons and more ammo, and I knew the crew chiefs had their weapons in the aircraft, so told him where they were. He grabbed them, came back out, gave me Gary's weapon. I had heard Gary say something that he had been hit. Now, obviously, if I'm getting his weapon, he's down, and it's probably just me and Randy at this point. And Randy goes back around the nose and he makes his last stand, and within a couple of minutes, he's overrun. And I fired the remaining rounds out of Gary's weapon, and when they overran the site, in my mind, I had nothing left. I did have my pistol, but this one I can't explain. Why I never drew my pistol will forever be a mystery to me. Many people have commented, well, it probably saved your life, because if you're laying there on the ground with a pistol and you're getting overrun by 100 armed Somalis, you're probably dead. So I had Gary's weapon across my chest. It was empty, and I thought, they were just going to kill me. And initially they started to, and then somebody realized I had value as a prisoner, and fired rounds in the air, got control of the mob, and they took me into captivity.
Jesus, what a story. I mean, let's dig into that then. So, I mean, for continuations purposes, I think this is where, it gets even worse, really, by the sounds of it. I mean, we had, like I said, Charlie Plum on the show before, and he was POW for 8 years. And, obviously yours was 11 days, but I mean, those 11 days were rough. Everything I've read just sounds awful. But, if you want to lightly touch on that, I think that would be a really, really important thing to go into. I think it's important because people will benefit from hearing that story, but also picking up some of the pointers along the way, like, how you hung on to hope, how you got through that situation. Really just the mental resilience side of it is quite an important pick out from that story. So can you talk us through those 11 days to POW? Horrific conditions, I can tell. So lightly touch on that if you can, but really just give us the rundown of how you got through that and what it was like.
Yeah, I think the key thing that I had against me was my injuries. I mean, these are really serious injuries. At some point in the next few minutes, and I don't even know when, my femur actually goes out the backside of my leg, so it becomes a compound femur fracture. Jeez. And even an injury like that, where people are taking it immediately to the hospital, oftentimes results in losing a leg or major infection, and I didn't really have adequate medical treatment for 11 days with this injury, and somehow miraculously there was no infection. But the injuries would have killed me. The doctors told me afterwards, they said I probably had 30 days based on what happened to me. Because when they overran the site, they smashed my face and broke my nose, my cheekbone, and my eye socket. And that is actually what would have killed me, because there was an infection there that developed. And the doctor said, it's so close to your brain that the infection would have gotten to your brain pretty quickly and probably would have taken your life. But, in terms of how you get through it, it's, the only thing that I can come up with is you have to break it into manageable pieces. And the more dynamic the situation, the shorter and smaller those pieces are. So, for example, when the mob is overrunning the site, I can't be thinking about, oh my goodness, I'm going to get captured. I can't spend years in captivity. I got to think about, I got to survive the next minute. What do I need to do to survive the next minute? And I went back to, I've been to survival school. This was not the case at the time, but it is the case now. At the time, only our unit in the Army went to survival school, and we joined our comrades in the Special Forces qualification course and went through that phase with them. And now every pilot in the Army goes through survival school. But at the time, just us. And unfortunately, I had been. And, they teach you a combination of survival and then when you're ultimately, if you are captured, how to survive in captivity. And so I tried to apply the lessons that I had learned there in terms of how to interact with your adversary, how to deal with questioning, you know, things like you got to eat something, right? I mean, you may not be hungry, but you've got to eat because if you don't eat and drink, you're not going to survive. You have to do those basic things. And, a lesson that they taught us in school was, they offered me some food in the training and I said I didn't want it. In the debrief afterwards, they said, if they're not asking you to do something in exchange for this, you take it because it's going to help you survive. So I tried to apply, as many of those lessons that I had learned in that training as I could, and I gave them very high marks in terms of the effectiveness of that training and how relevant it was. And it's been tweaked a little bit since because it was really primarily geared around a Vietnam type scenario, which really is not the case anymore, or very rarely if it is. And it's more toward like my situation and others like it. Short duration, high intensity, not a prison camp, just being held sort of by who knows who in some remote location or, uh, where there's civilians mixed around and everything else. They moved me a couple of times. I was interrogated. It did get put out on international news within minutes. Again, I applied the lessons that I had learned in training, and it worked very, very well. They still use that video, as far as I know, in training pretty much anybody that's out there going in harm's way that faces potentially being captured or held by an adversary. I was shot in captivity. It was just a random drive-by. There was one point where I thought they'd abandoned me in the city. I was in a car, thought about trying to escape, but I was laying on the floor in the back seat. And again, with these injuries, I just thought there was no way I could crawl up over the front seat, get in the driver's seat, and drive what would have probably been a standard transmission, with a leg that I couldn't even control. So uh, I, I, I was I didn't get very far down that path of trying to execute my escape before they came back anyway. And then ultimately, I was released. The president sent the former ambassador to Somalia back over. He was a trusted agent. The Somalis believed him. They had a lot of respect for him, and he basically said, "Look, this is in your best interest to just let him go." And within about 48 hours, they did.
Jesus Christ. I mean, wow. I mean, what do you credit all that to? Inner strength? I mean, is that a religious thing? You think it was an act of God that you got through that, or was it your training? I don't know. I mean, what do you think that was? And I mean, getting out of there, getting back to, I don't know, could you ever get back to normal after an experience like that?
Well, I feel like I have, in terms of what got me through it. I mean, God has a hand in everything. It's His plan, but we have to do what we can do to better our own situation. I mean, we can't just assume, throw our hands up and say, whatever God has planned is going to happen. There's a reason He sent me to survival school, and there's a reason that I knew how to fly that aircraft like I knew how to fly it, and all the things that happened. But it was on me to do the things that I could do that were within my control to try to survive and make it through. And I thought a lot about my son, my 1 year old. I left a couple of days before his first birthday, and thinking about him growing up without me and not being a part of his life was a major part of keeping me motivated. And I'm not going to say I would have never given up, but it never entered my mind to not keep moving forward. Now, again, that's a fairly short period of time. I'm sure, the psychological battle becomes bigger and bigger as time continues on. But for me, never entered my mind. I was always just trying to think of how do I get out of here? Came up with all sorts of different ideas. At one point, I asked them to wash my T-shirt, thinking if they washed it, they'd hang it out on the line and then maybe, an aircraft flying overhead would see my brown T-shirt. That's a stretch, okay? But I mean, when your options are limited, you got to come up with something, and it just shows this sort of constant trying to figure out, how do I solve this problem? How do I help solve this problem? Thinking about what I would do when the rescue came, because eventually it would come. I mean, I can't say it would have happened in 60 days, 90 days, whatever, but it would have come eventually. I mean, the units involved here are the units that would be called upon to do the rescue, so they're already there. If they ever got wind of where I was, it would have been a matter of minutes before they put a mission together and came and got me. So I was thinking about, how do I avoid being shot, when the building I'm in is being taken down, just all those kind of things. And whether it's my nature, I'm not sure, but it's just not in me to say, I'm done, I'm tapping out. It's just not me.
Definitely. Well, one of the things I really like about your story as well is that, I mean, one of the things I learned on this podcast from other guests as well is that, now obviously kind of treading carefully to say that anything about that was a positive experience, but what I have heard from a lot of people who've been through things, they've said that the most negative experiences have sometimes become positive things over time because of the lessons learned there as well. And it looks like from what you've done after all of this, you've gone and you've sort of done a full circle flip on its head with this experience. And now you're teaching leaders and organizations about resilience, performance under pressure, and decision making. So if we can get a little bit of that wisdom, I mean, obviously, we don't have that much time, but we do have a little bit of time to dig into, the shallow end of really what some of those biggest takeaways were from such a negative experience. So if you can flip all of that on its head, I mean, how does that apply to someone listening in today to this podcast, for example? So whether they're in sports or, going into the military or running a business and stuff, a horrible experience like what you went through, how can people relate to that or find at least a common ground in there to learn from this and not just nod their head and hear another great story, but also come away from this with things to go out and do and apply?
Well, I think what's easier and more relevant to relate to is a broader picture about this unit that I was in, and how incredible it is. And to me, that macro perspective is what really changed me as a person. Yes, Somalia changed me as a person, but it's such a unique circumstance that, outside of what we've kind of already talked about, the perseverance and the trying to find solutions to the problem and, breaking it down into small steps. Those are sort of standard answers for getting through any sort of adversity. But in terms of where's the real value here, I think it comes more from being a part of that organization. And that whenever I do talk about this mission or, my experiences or talk about organizational effectiveness or leadership, I always talk about why I think these units can do what they do. And when I say these units, I mean, the elite special forces units, Delta, SEAL teams, 6 in particular, Army Rangers, Marines, Special Operations Command, which did not exist in 1993, by the way, that they were not part of the community yet and have been formed since. Air Force Special Tactics, there's other 3-letter agencies that have their own special military units or military-like units. Why are these organizations able to do what they do? And that's what I focus on. And I think the number one thing is culture. And if you can find a way to develop and refine a culture that is accepted by everyone in your organization, and everyone starts, the example that I always used to use when I was running my company was a rowing team. If we're not rowing in the same direction in sync, we're not going straight. And if we're not going straight, that's not the most efficient path to where we're trying to get. And everybody's got to be in unison, understanding what their role is, and just buying in to the values and the mission of the organization. And that's culture. And, it applies to sports teams. If you look at on the sidelines or on the, you know, any game being played, you can tell just by the way people are acting on the sidelines whether or not that team is a team that is maximizing the talent that they have on board or not. I mean, yes, you got to have talent. I mean, if you don't have talent, I don't care how much culture you have, you're probably not going to do very well in sports. But if you have both, if you have the talent and the culture, then you can make amazing things happen. And that's, to me, what made those units so special is that everybody there was committed to the mission. Everybody understood their role in supporting the mission. Everybody would have done everything it took to make sure their role was fulfilled, because everybody's job is important. I mean, it's a cliche, but it is true. I mean, everybody's role, whether you're in the front seat of flight lead of a aircraft going into the target, or you're the mechanic that made that aircraft fly, this mission doesn't happen without both of you. And the culture in these organizations is the best I've ever seen. Now, I've never been in a Super Bowl winning locker room or a Stanley Cup winning locker room, but I'm sure the culture there is very similar. There's good, strong commitment to winning, and that's what again, I can't say it enough. I think really differentiated this organization that I was a part of from others that I've been a part of in the past. And you know, it is, you got to have the great people though. You have to have a process to find, recruit and retain great people. You got to have great leadership, and I feel like we did. Now, not everybody in that organization is a great leader. You're never going to find an organization that's got, over decades, everybody that went through their leadership position was a great leader, but the majority, I believe, were. And getting to work side by side with those great leaders, it just has an effect on you. You see what works and what doesn't. And you try to emulate that. I think some of the key attributes are, you probably heard the term servant leadership, understanding that you might be the leader, but that doesn't mean people serve you. You serve them. If you can adopt that mentality where my job is to facilitate your success, not the other way around, it's almost magical how it works, because people will trust you, people will want to work hard for you, knowing that you have their back and you care about them and their success as much or more than your own. And when it's, some people fake it, quite frankly, but when it's genuine and people can sense that, they'll go to the ends of the earth to get their jobs done. It's communicating effectively, and communicating is a two-way street, right? It's not just transmitting, it's also receiving. You have to be, a good listener. You have to truly hear what the people that you're leading have to say and value that input. And I've not always been great at that. I mean, none of us are perfect, right? There's times when I was being told stuff I didn't want to hear, and I probably didn't react the right way. But you've got to really strive to encourage that honest input, because if you're not getting that, then you're making decisions based on only a part of the truth. So all those things combined, I think, are what people can learn from and leverage. You know, training, planning, strategic thinking, values, strategies, all those things all matter. And if you notice, I hadn't said anything about profit, because if you're in a business and all you care about is profit, it's probably not going to go very well long term, because there are just things that happen that sometimes, if you're not profitable, you're not going to last very long. You have to be profitable, but it can't be the focus, 24 hours a day. It has to be almost a byproduct of everything else. You do everything else well, it should happen, unless you make some bad decisions, in terms of pricing or marketing or expenses or whatever. That's sort of the details of good fiscal management, but it can't be the number one priority, because people are really turned off by that, and you'll lose the culture pretty quick if all you care about is how profitable everything is.
Completely agree. Some really, really good advice there and some fantastic points I think for people to take away from this. And myself too, running a gym now, my first experience with staff and culture in this place as well and building community. There's some really good things I'm definitely taking away from this too. And, that's only in 5 or 10 minutes of trying to get the best out of you in that space. I mean, imagine if someone was working with you. I think that's a really good place for us to dig into that as well then quickly. So if we have like a little bit of a kind of a shameless plug moment now then as well. So in terms of finding out more about you, the things that you do, speaking, services, everything and above, where can we find out more? Where can we learn more, etc.? And if this podcast is kind of like a bit of a starting point for that, where should we go next from that too?
So I'm not big into social media. I mean, I have a LinkedIn account, and that's basically it. And I don't really even post much to that. Uh, as I said at the first part of our podcast, I'm involved in a few nonprofits. I would say the one I'm most actively involved in that I feel most strongly about is the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. Now, people get it confused with Wounded Warrior Foundation all the time. That's another nonprofit. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the Special Ops Warrior Foundation, SOWF. And the website is specialops.org, O-R-G. And this organization came to life in the failed attempt to rescue the American hostages in Iran in the 80s. And not everyone knows the story, but the bottom line is there was an aircraft incident in the desert in Iran. There were 8 American lives lost. And almost immediately, the surviving operators and crew members got together and said they wanted to do something to help support the children of those warriors who lost their lives there in Desert One. And since then, it has matured into a very robust organization that the charter of which is to pay for the education of every child of a special operations individual who has either served with or was actively supporting a special operations unit or mission, cradle to career. So whether it's preschool, specialized tutoring, all the way up through college is fully funded. There's no application. You have to fill out some paperwork, but it's not a matter of, there's 10 kids and one's going to get it. Every one of them gets it. And that is the charter. We also now pay for the education of Medal of Honor recipients' children as well. Wow. And then badly wounded get some assistance also. So it's one of the, I would argue it's the best nonprofit I'm aware of. There's lots of great nonprofits, but this one in particular, because it helps the children, the folks who volunteer to be at the point of the spear and paid with their lives, is pretty special to me. So if folks want to go out there and research that, again, it's specialops.org.
That is fantastic. That is an incredible mission. I'm going to go look at that and have a really good look through that as well. And I don't know who's like fully running all that and stuff, if there's more people there, but I'd love to podcast with them one day too and speak about that mission, how that all started as well. That sounds like another great episode to have. But for now, Mike, I just got to say thank you so much for joining me today for the Talk4 podcast. It has been an absolute pleasure and a big honor to have you on. Thank you for your vulnerability, sharing your story. And I feel like we've taken a lot away from this. It is really fantastic what you're doing. And I can't wait to see where you take all of it too. It's very exciting.
Well, I appreciate it. And I will connect you up with the Special Ops Warrior Foundation so if we can get somebody from the staff to do a podcast with you.
Let's do it, sir. Thank you guys for listening. This was episode 172. And if you'd like to listen to the past episodes, go and have a look at the channel. And if you'd like to listen to the future ones as well, make sure to hit that subscribe button and spread some love by leaving a like and a comment. Signing off for now. See you in the next one. Good night.